So thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. It's a real pleasure to be in the launch of the platform of Polish scientific publications. And I'm very pleased to be here and also taking some of the words of the director, Mikalewicz, excuse me for my pronunciation, because there is a lot of effort, a lot of time and a lot of dedication behind this launch. And I think it's a step forward in moving towards open science. And it's many of us, those that we are involved in developing and promoting and pushing forward open science. So all this effort, big congratulations for the launch of this platform. And also other words that I like very much is that those resources, those open access publications and books should be there to serve the public in order to allow for access and reuse of that. And that is very important in the work of the European Commission and with regard to the results of publicly funded research and the research that we have funded. So thank you very much. Also, Dr. Krzysztof Siewicz, again, sorry for the pronunciation, for the invitation. And just a little bit, because when being invited, you mentioned that it could be good to share some reflections about open access and about the future of science. And I thought it would be good to present recent developments in the European Commission's policy on open science. We have open access at the very core of it, and now a broader scope with regard to open science. So what is open science and why do we need it? So as you know, there are many definitions of open science. We like to say that open science is about sharing knowledge, data, and tools as early as possible in the research process in open collaboration with all relevant knowledge actors. And why is it needed, open science? Because it has the potential to increase the quality and efficiency of research and innovation if all the produced results are shared, made reusable, and if the reproducibility is improved. It has the potential to increase creativity through collective intelligence and cross-disciplinary research that does not require laborious data wrangling. And trust, very importantly, it has the potential and is already increasing trust in the science system by engaging both researchers and citizens. And we all know how important that is. So what are the main challenges and priorities that we have identified for open science? So we see the need to improve the practice of research and innovation, openly accessible scholarly publications, the early sharing of all research outputs, all data being fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, research data management, reproducible results, and societal engagement and responsibility. And also the need to develop proper enablers for that, rewards and incentives to adopt open science practices with appropriate metrics, appropriate skills and education, including for research integrity, and open research infrastructures, including the European Open Science Cloud. It is key to involve all the actors and to engage also internationally, because as we all know, research has no frontiers, and it's paramount to change the research culture. So as we have seen with the pandemic, there have been some positive trends towards open science. We can see, for example, an early and fast share of results through an increased use of preprints. Publishers temporarily opening up some of their publication, although we have to say that this opening up, in some cases, I wouldn't qualify it as open access. It was more temporary access because it was in a temporary way. To me, open access has to be forever. It has to remain. And also with some restrictive licenses in many cases. And the open access definition and concept that we'd like to use is also free from most copyright restrictions, so that it allows reuse, although some specific licenses can sometimes limit the kind of reuse. But some challenges remain. Most open access papers, for example, even those related to COVID, do not make their underlying data available without restrictions, and research data are not fully interoperable and reusable. We also are fully aware of the crisis we are living with regard to reproducibility. So despite the bulk of money that is invested in health research and innovation, and in general in research and innovation, a large share of the research investment may be wasted, potentially as much as 85%, according to Chalmers and Glacieux in The Lancet, and MacLeod also published in The Lancet. Why? Because sometimes the scientific questions are not pertinent. There is a poor study design, conduct, and analysis. Sometimes results are not fully accessible. Reporting of results can be biased, and there are unusable research reports. So we are aware of this lack of the tools and framework conditions for reproducibility, and how it is very important to improve such conditions. So in order to introduce our policy on open science and the recent developments in this policy, allow me to present the roles that the European Commission plays in the research and innovation context. So the European Commission acts wherein we usually say we're in different hats. So we act as a policymaker, proposing EU legislation and monitoring its implementation. We also work with the two legislators, the European Parliament and the Council, and we invite member states to act. We also act as a funder. In the domain of research and innovation, this is a very important role that allows us to set our own rules for scientific research and innovation funded by the European Commission, as I will present later on, for example, through the Horizon Europe Framework Programme for Research and Innovation. We can set the conditions for open science to scientific results that we are funding. And also we act as a capacity builder. So we have research facilities, the Joint Research Centre, and we also fund infrastructure that support EC and EU policy. And yes, by the way, I was very happy to hear that the European Commission has contributed via the European Regional Development Fund to the Polish platform for scientific publications. That was very good to hear. So open science in Horizon Europe. As you know, Horizon Europe is the framework program that we have for the coming years for research and innovation. The Commission invests heavily in research and innovation. For this framework program, we have more or less 95.5 billion euros. And it is very important to make the best use of the possible work that is emanating from this public funding. So open science in the framework programs has followed an evolution. We see that already in the Framework Programme 7 in 2008, there was a pilot on open access to scientific publications. Then there was an evolution in 2014 and the next Framework Programme, Horizon 2020, with open access to publications becoming mandatory and with a pilot on open research data, including data management plans. There has been a further evolution in 2017 in which open research data became by default the norm to be applied, always allowing exceptions following the principle as open as possible, as close as necessary. And now under Horizon Europe, we move beyond the focus exclusively on open access to the broader concept of open science. Open science is embedded across Horizon Europe via the evaluation of proposals. Open science is evaluated in the proposals under excellence, methodology, and under quality and efficiency of implementation, via the requirements, the obligations that we have on open science for our beneficiaries in the grant agreement, and also in a specific work programs and calls. We provide guidelines also to them on how to comply, how to meet those requirements, and via the reporting during the project's lifetime. So there is a strengthening of the open access obligations. Open access remains at the core of open science. But for research data, the focus has moved from open access to research data management in line with the FAIR principles that I mentioned before of findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability. So as you can see here, open science is streamlined in Horizon Europe throughout the project lifetime, from the proposal submission to the project phase and the monitoring. And this is very important in order to have a comprehensive approach towards open science and its practices. What our our main requirements for our beneficiaries, so the obligations that they have per the Horizon Europe grant agreement. With regard to publications, with regard to scientific peer-reviewed publications, beneficiaries must ensure the position and immediate open access via a trusted repository. So here it's very important that in Horizon Europe, we will no longer allow for embargo periods. Open access has to be provided immediately. Also important to mention that it has to be provided via a trusted repository, no matter the publication venue, even in those cases in which our beneficiaries decide to publish in an open access venue. They can say, okay, by my publication is already open access. I publish in an open access journal. Even in that case, they will have to provide open access via the repository because we believe in the importance of institutional repositories or community-driven repositories for long text preservation, for the ownership by the research community and institutional academic institutions. So always immediate open access to be provided via trusted repositories. What are trusted repositories? This is a new concept that we have introduced that is defined in the annotated grant agreement of Horizon Europe. It can comprise certified repositories and repositories that meet certain characteristics. And very importantly, and I was very happy also to hear about the importance and the work you are doing in the Polish platform for scientific publications with regard to licensing and open licensing and the training and the legal aspects of open access, because licenses are a key part of open access. And for our beneficiaries, we require a Creative Commons Attribution License, or CC BY or equivalent. And we allow CC BY and CC BY ND, or the combination of both, for long text formats, for example, books and monographs. And it's also important, as I mentioned before, for reproducibility, for the validation of the results that we are funding. We ask our beneficiaries to provide information via repository of any tool, instrument, research output that is needed to validate the conclusions of the publication. Also, very importantly, beneficiaries must retain sufficient intellectual property rights to comply with their open access obligations. I will later on elaborate on the importance of copyright and adequate copyright management for open access. Open access publication fees are refundable only in full open access publishing venues. So our beneficiaries can publish wherever they want in the venue of their choice, but we will only reimburse the publication fees when the publishing venue is full open access. What do we understand by full open access? That all content has to be openly accessible to everyone. Those publication venues in which the content, some content, is openly accessible to everyone, but in which part of the content is only accessible to subscribers, will not be eligible for reimbursement. But our beneficiaries can still publish there if they so wish. And metadata of deposited publications must be open under a Creative Commons public domain dedication or equivalent and in line with the FAIR principles. So those are our requirements with regard to open access to scientific publications. With regard to research data management, as I mentioned before, the focus has evolved from having a focus on open access to research data management in line with FAIR. The obligation to provide and regularly update a DMP, a data management plan, to deposit data in a trusted repository. In some core conditions, it may be required that this repository is federated in the European Open Science Cloud and to link to publications, if the case. And to ensure open access, SAIP as soon as possible and within the deadline set in the data management plan under a CC BY license, a public domain dedication or equivalent, unless exceptions apply, following the principle as open as possible, as close as necessary. So the difference with publications is that for publications, we don't force, of course, our beneficiaries to publish, but if they decide to publish, they need to provide immediate open access under open licenses. No exceptions to that. For research data, there are exceptions to the openness of research data. For example, in the case of legitimate interest, constraints because of data protection, confidentiality, or any other legitimate interest or obligations in the grant agreement. They need to provide information via the repository about the tools, instruments, results which are needed for the validation or reuse of data, and metadata must be open under a public domain dedication or equivalent and in line with the FAIR principles. Also here, exceptions may apply. And we have also included in the Horizon Europe legal provisions additional obligations that may be imposed by the call conditions, so at the level of the call, and also regarding the validation of scientific publications. So access has to be provided for the validation of scientific publications, not only information, as I mentioned before, but access with some exceptions and allows, and also in the case of public emergency, in order to allow for the deposition and open access to research outputs beyond publications and research data, unless there are legitimate interests or constraints. So those are our obligations for our beneficiaries, let's say, which are at the core of the legal obligations with regard to open science. But we know that open science practices go much beyond those obligations. So as we say, there are those mandatory open access practices that are required by the grant agreement or the call conditions, the work program, but also some recommended open science practices. And here you can see a non-exhaustive list, of course, those recommended open science practices, early and open sharing of research, also open access to research outputs beyond publications and data, models, algorithms, software, participation in open peer review, and involving all relevant knowledge actors. And both the recommended and the mandatory open science practices will be taken into account in the evaluation of proposals in Horizon Europe, which is very important in order to move forward also and in order to be doing what we are preaching for a long time. So to move towards open science is key. A change in the research assessment system, a change in the way research is evaluated, proposals also are taken into account. And in Horizon Europe, open science practices will be evaluated, mandatory, also the recommended will be taken into account, and also very importantly, in the list of achievements that our participants have to include, publications will not be considered or evaluated because of the journal impact factor, but through a qualitative assessment of the research. So also in line with the San Francisco Declaration, the DORA Declaration on Research Assessment, the Leiden Manifesto, to move forward in the research assessment of research output. So we are fully aware of the role we can play as a funder in evaluating the proposals that we will then fund of those projects, and open science is integrated in that evaluation of proposals. I have also included here the plan to be confirmed, some calls that we will have on open access. There will be other calls on open science more broadly, but also other areas of future action and funding, including institutional publishing, books and monographs, or common technical solutions. So this is what we're doing as a funder, let's say, through our framework program for research and innovation. But as I mentioned before, the European Commission and Open Science has many different roles and many different ways of acting. And a crucial part of ERA, of the European research area, as you know, that area, in order to allow for the freedom of the free circulation of knowledge, is open science. And in the ERA communication published in 2020, we have different actions which are related to open science. And in Action 9, I would like to highlight the launch of the platform of peer review open access publishing, the analysis of authors' rights to enable sharing of publicly funded peer review articles without restriction, ensuring the European Open Science Cloud that is offering findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable research data and services, and incentivize open science practices by improving the research assessment system. We also have, very importantly, citizen engagement as part of Action 13. So let me present you also some of the areas or initiatives that we are doing in those specific, with regard to those specific actions. Open Research Europe is the open access publishing platform of the European Commission that was recently launched. Why Open Research Europe? To support our open access policy and beneficiary capacity to adhere to it and enable publishing post-grant and not cost for our beneficiaries, even when the project has come to an end, to lead by example in operationalizing open science principles within scientific publishing and enabling the European research area, and to contribute to transparency and cost effectiveness and explore sustainable open access publishing models. So the publishing service, how does it work? It is a publishing platform. It is not a repository. It's about original articles which stem from Horizon 2020, funded research, and Horizon Europe, and it covers all scientific areas. It provides, of course, immediate open access. We are not going to have an open access publishing platform that is contrary to our requirements for our beneficiaries. So, of course, immediate open access with content license for reuse under open licenses. Open peer review, transparency in the peer review process, and each article has a dedicated metrics page. There is no impact factor for the platform. This is a question get very often, but there are metrics at the article level. And the no impact factor for the platform is done on purpose because we want to move beyond the focus on the impact factor of the publishing venue and to drive the attention towards the article, the quality of the intrinsic value and quality of research per se. And super networked and mineable with PIDs, persistent identifiers, connection to repositories, open data software, and preservation of content. What are the main assets of ORE, the Open Research Europe publishing platform for our beneficiaries? It's high quality, it's reliable and efficient publishing venue for EU research. There is transparency, and it's high quality, and there is an oversight by an independent scientific advisory board. There is no cost for our beneficiaries, authors' beneficiaries, and no administrative burden for them. They know that by publishing in the Open Research Europe publishing platform, they will comply, they will meet the open access requirements that I presented before in Horizon Europe. So it's fully aligned with our policy. But of course, let me emphasize how there is no obligation, and there will never be an obligation to use this publishing venue, this publishing platform. It's just another publishing venue. It's a publishing venue that we put at the disposal of our beneficiaries. We believe in the high quality and in the good things that this publishing venue can bring to our beneficiaries, but of course, they have no obligation to publish. Another area of action that is also part of the area of communication, and that Dr. Christoph Siewicz also mentioned, and I was also very happy to hear about that, is the importance of copyright and open science. So as you know, copyright is a bundle of rights that protect authors on their creations, but also allow copyright holders to determine who, when, and how will access and reuse their works. It's very important, therefore, to link copyright not only to protection, but also to dissemination and to the conditions of dissemination. And this is particularly important in the context, I would say, of academia. Why? Because very frequently we still see how the authors or researchers assign their copyright to publishers and then losing the ability to determine who, when, and how will access and reuse their works. Sometimes our beneficiaries come back to us saying, but I have given away my rights to the publisher, so I'm no longer in a position to comply with the open access obligations. So this is why in Horizon Europe, we require, as I presented before, that our beneficiaries retain sufficient IPRs to comply with the obligations. An adequate copyright management, but also an adequate copyright legislative framework are key for open science. And this is another role that the Commission is playing, another hat that we are using, and is making sure or making our best that the copyright framework is fit for research and for innovation. Here, and since text and data mining and the importance of text and data mining has also been highlighted during the presentation, I would like to mention the transposition of the copyright in the Digital Single Market Directive that was due a few days ago on the 7th of June. So Article 3 and 4 deal with text and data mining in this directive. Article 3 for research organizations and cultural heritage institutions for the purpose of scientific research. So a narrow scope, we are fully aware of that, but at least there is an exception to the rights of reproduction and extraction for those organizations for those purposes. And Article 4, broader scope on text and data mining, anyone having legal access to the content, but with some, let's say, some barriers to it, such as the potential or the possibility for right holders to prevent this, to reserve the rights to prevent this. But let's see what happens with the transposition at the national level. There is some leeway in the transposition by the member states, so we are very much looking forward to monitoring this transposition and help member states in it. So as I mentioned before, under the ERA communication also, we will analyze authors' rights to enable sharing of publicly funded peer review articles without restriction. What do we mean by this is that we are also following closely recent developments in some countries in which there has been an enactment or an amendment to copyright legislation to introduce some secondary publishing rights, even in those cases in which authors have given away the rights to publishers, if that publication results from publicly funded research. In some countries, legislation allows to provide open access, sometimes after an embargo period, via repositories. We are having an analysis of the situation, of the many initiatives, also initiatives at the institutional level, the Harvard policy, the UK scholarly communication license, to see what else we can do in the realm of authors' rights to enable sharing of publicly funded peer review articles without restriction. So legislative matters or non-legislative. And also very importantly, the review of the database directive will be part of the upcoming Data Act. So we have the 1996 directive on the legal protection of databases, and this will be reviewed as part of the initiative called the Data Act. There is now a roadmap and a public consultation on the Data Act, which includes the review of the database directive. And of course, I encourage you to participate in this public consultation because given your expertise, your work, your feedback will be very, very valuable. Is the database directive fit for research and innovation? Can it be changed? Should it be changed? In which sense? So please have your say. It would be extremely appreciated and valuable. I would say in all those public consultations about Data Act, digital and data strategies, it's very important to hear the voice of the research community. As you know, those consultations are open for a broad variety of stakeholders, private sector, businesses, and it's very important that amongst those voices, we hear the voice of research with their specific concerns and what has to be addressed in order to make the legislative framework that we have fit for research. So very briefly, I will just mention the European Open Science Cloud that is also part of ERA Action 9, as I mentioned before, a trusted, federated, and multi-provider ecosystem that cuts across borders and scientific disciplines. The challenge is not limited to linking datasets, federating infrastructures, or aligning policies. It starts by linking people and organizations across the EOSC ecosystem. And lastly, the importance of reforming the research assessment system. So to move from the current system that is focused dominantly in rewarding individual competent scientists to rewarding collaboration and sharing, in the focus on publishing as much as fast as possible to share knowledge and data as early and as possible, moving from excellence being defined largely on the basis of where scientists publish to a composite definition of excellence, and to incentivize researchers to share, collaborate, and increase quality and impact, and also to move in order to avoid lock-in over publicly funded research and innovation output. So this is something on which we are currently consulting different stakeholders in order to advance on how to reform the research assessment system. And I will stop here. Thank you very much, because I would like to, if possible, to take some questions and to allow for some interaction. So thank you very much for your attention, and looking forward to your questions or comments, of course.
Yes, thank you very much. We still have some time for questions, and I encourage everyone who wants to ask a question to write it on the chat window, and I will present it on the main screen. Jeżeli Państwo chcą też zadać pytania po polsku, to bardzo proszę, w ramach własnym sumptem przetłumaczymy. Okay, so please wait some time if any questions come up. Well, in the meantime, maybe I will ask a question. Okay, there is a question about contact data. And my question would be, since what we've been cooperating with in Poland and in our region, the most the biggest part of journals involved in open access are so-called diamond open access journals, publicly financed. No authors don't have to pay for publications, and maybe you could somehow address such aspect of open access and its part in the European policy.
Yes, of course. Diamond venues are key in the future, I would say, of open science, also because of the non-paying. Sometimes open access, people associate it first to gold open access, which is not always the case, and to paying APC gold open access. So it's very important also, and we would like to focus on institutionally and research-led publishing, and diamond journals are a very good example of that. That is why we included in some of the calls that we will be supporting financially, support for institutional publishing, including diamond open access. And this is a very good example of the way forward for open science and for open access. So there are many ways for open access, but of course, any initiative that is community-led, non-paying, also by the research community, that should be welcome, encouraged, and supported.
Okay, thank you. There is a question about some contact information. If maybe we owe our participants some more information about not just you yourself, but the unit that you are involved in at the European Commission?
Yes, so I work in the Open Science Unit. This is Unit A4 in the Directorate General for Research and Innovation. So we are let's say, middle unit, 22, 23 people now. We work on different topics. I work with 3 other colleagues on open access to scientific results. There are other colleagues more focused on fair data, other colleagues working on the European Open Science Cloud, colleagues of mine working on research assessment or citizen engagement. So our head of unit is Konstantinos Glinos. You might have come across him. So a big unit working hard in order to deliver on many different aspects of open science in the Directorate General for Research and Innovation.
Okay, and I see one more question.
Yes, with regard to green, if no embargo is allowed, does it mean that green open access is not compliant? No, and we require always, so we would like also to get rid a little bit of the colors, because sometimes it's confusing to refer to gold, to green. If by green we understand open access provided via the repository, that is a requirement of our policy, no matter the publication venue. Open access has always needs to be provided via a repository. What we no longer allow is embargo periods. So if a beneficiary decides to provide in a subscription journal, and this journal requires an embargo of 6 or 12 months, that is not a route towards compliance with our policy, because we require immediate open access. But if green is via the repository, that is still required. But immediate, let's say, immediate green and under open licenses. Immediate open access via the repository under open licenses.
Thank you. And maybe one more question.
Is there a risk of science splitting into open science and closed science? Wouldn't that be breeding ground for elitism? So we think that open science is just what science should be. So it's the way, also personally, is the way of doing science right, of doing it appropriately, especially when this science has been funded publicly. So elitism, I would say, it's of course a process. It takes efforts, it takes resources. We are there to support, but it's a concerted effort by many stakeholders, many actors, the research community, research performing organizations, funders, publishers. So it's a concerted effort, but I couldn't say elitism. We should all evolve towards open science, which is science done right, following the right framework, the right conditions, and the right process, let's say.
Thank you. We are almost past the time, but I hope you can still answer one more question that has just come up.
Yes, the criteria for trusted repositories. So for that, because there are different requirements that have to be met, so it can be certified repositories or certain requirements to be met, but we will very shortly, I don't know if this week or next week, but very shortly we will provide the annotated model grant agreement in the funding and tender portal of the European Commission of Research and Innovation. And there, under guidance, you see this annotated model grant agreement with information on trusted repository and more information about it. So I would just ask you to please wait a few days so this is published, and you will be able to consult that information on trusted repositories.
Okay, thank you very much. We are strictly on time, back on the track with our schedule. Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. There is certainly a lot of more that we and I personally would like to talk with you about, but I hope that that's not the last time that we meet in the...
Of course, let's keep in touch. And thank you very much for having me here today. I mean it, and congratulations again for the launch. So thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, and goodbye.